Thank you. Well, we are definitely privileged to have 3 outstanding candidates with us tonight, and we are going to have them each give a 3-minute introductory statement. The questions then will be rotated, okay? The ladies have drawn numbers, and so Ms. Bateson will be first, and on down we've got them in order that they drew. And everybody gets to answer the same question, and they will have 2 minutes per question. Ms. House up here will be timing, and they will get a 30-second cue. That time's almost up. For the sake of getting through this, because we've got a list of questions and more coming hopefully from you as it occurs to you, if you have questions that you want to follow up on, please get it down on one of those cards in the back of the table, or raise your hand and a runner will bring you a card, and then we will sort through the questions and add on as needed. Okay? And then finally, after all the questions from the audience have been asked, each candidate will be allowed to ask a question of the other 2 candidates. And then finally, there will be a 1-minute closing. So remember, if you think you have a question that occurs to you as you're listening, just put your hand in the air, somebody will bring you a card. Okay? Let's see, please note that the forum is scheduled for 2 hours. The forum is scheduled for 2 hours, but if there's a preponderance of questions, it can be extended to 2.5. Okay? Okay, and also last thing, would you please hold any audience response, whether it be glaring, hurrahs or whatever, until the very end, so that we can keep this rolling. Everybody good? All right then, Gina, you get to go first.
All right. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Now, I'm going to start by breaking a rule. I'm going to ask you to give yourselves a round of applause. Whoever would have thought we'd have a packed room here in Mariposa. Now, my name is Regina Bateson, and I'm from Roseville. Roseville's way up on the northern end of our district, and in some ways it is different than here. We're a big, bustling suburb of Sacramento. But I'll tell you that I see some similarities between the community where I grew up and the community here. I see that people value hard work, and people are civic-minded and community-minded. I was so lucky and privileged to be able to stop by a recognition ceremony just now for some of the tutors in the adult literacy program here, for example. And I see that there are differences across communities in our district, but there are also a lot of things that unite us. And that's why I'm running for Congress. It's to fight for those shared values and those shared priorities. Our community up in Roseville taught me the value of hard work. At one point I had 3 jobs at the same time. I've done food service, softball umpiring, really a bit of everything. But our community also taught me the power of education. After going to our public schools, I was able to go off to college, get a bachelor's degree from Stanford, and after 9/11 I joined the Foreign Service. I became a Foreign Service officer, one of the youngest ever, and went off to work for the State Department as a diplomat in DC and in Latin America, working on border security. Then I went back to school with a scholarship. I was able to get a PhD, and I became a tenure-track university professor. But I've actually stepped away from that now because this race really matters. And 2018 is our opportunity to make some important positive changes for our district. We deserve a real voice in Washington, D.C. I look at my 3 kids, and I see that they don't have the role models right now that they deserve. And our district does not have the leadership it deserves. Everything we hold dear is under threat. From a high-quality public education that's accessible to everyone and equitable, from a strong local economy and good-paying jobs, from a fair system of taxation, which is being renegotiated right now, to our public lands. Basic protections for our national monuments, our national parks, appropriate levels of funding so that we can manage our federal forests in line with the best scientific practices and advice, and health care. You guys in Mariposa are living the effects of the continued threats of the repeal of the Affordable Care Act, which could have such detrimental effects on the hospital here. So those are my priorities. That's what I'm running to fight for. And I'm proud to say that our campaign has the largest grassroots network that this district has seen in at least 10 years on the Democratic side. We just passed 402 volunteers, some of whom are here tonight. And I want you to join that movement. We're building up a strong campaign that's going to beat Tom McClintock in 2018. We've got the grassroots network, strong fundraising, and an excellent operation. So you can see some of the volunteers at the back if you'd like to sign up. Thank you so much.
Okay, next I'd like to introduce Jessica Morse. Ladies, I'm sorry, could we stay seated with your mouth in front of the mic because they might be having a hard time hearing you in the back of the room?
Okay.
You need to turn them on too. There's a switch somewhere.
Sorry.
There you go.
That might help.
The red light will tell you it's on.
Okay, is that good? All right. Who's ready to fire Tom McClintock? Yes, I'm Jessica Morse. I'm a fifth-generation Northern Californian. My great-great-grandparents came over on covered wagons, and unlike the Donner Party, they made it. And they landed in the foothills outside of Auburn, where we still have a couple hundred acres of our beautiful original homestead forest land to this day. I even have a gold mine that my great-grandfather won in a poker bet. So I have deep roots in this community. I grew up hiking and hunting and fishing and backpacking and camping all over this district. I've actually hiked the entire district on the Pacific Crest Trail, 500 miles. And I love coming to Mariposa because my family and I would spend a week every single year since I was 2 years old camping in Yosemite Valley, and it feels like where I grew up. So I was raised in the town of Carmichael, and my mom instilled in me really early on a deep commitment to community service. We would spend our weekends out cleaning up rivers, volunteering with our church, volunteering at the nursing home. And I learned early on that a service-driven life is a purpose-filled life. And so it was very natural for me, out of college, to dedicate myself to the service of humanity. I joined the U.S. Agency for International Development. It's the humanitarian aid wing of the State Department. And they took one look at me and they said, Jessica, we think you should go to Baghdad. So they sent me to Iraq at the height of the war, and I called my mom and I said, don't worry, Mom, this is for your own spiritual growth. She didn't laugh, though. But I hadn't fully understood what I got into until I got there. On the ground in Iraq, I was standing side by side with our troops every day. And I was 23 years old, this was 2005, and we had rockets and mortars and gunfire coming in. And one day I walked into our office and one of my Marine buddies was hunched over his computer and he was weeping. And I said, oh my God, what's wrong? Who's died? And he said, my wife is at home having our first child and our video feed just went dead. It is critical that our members of Congress who decide whether or not our troops go to war understand the sacrifice they are asking of our troops, of their families, and the communities they are leaving behind. It is also critical that our members of Congress understand our community. When I came home from Iraq, I learned one of the most important lessons of my life. I was talking to a couple cousins who watched different cable news channels, and one of my cousins was talking all about WMDs and who lied about them. And the other was talking about the Saddam Hussein trial and the newfound freedom of the Iraqi people. Neither of them were talking about the insurgency that we were seeing on the ground that would later morph into ISIS, and America needed to be paying attention. And so I said to my cousins, trying to describe Iraq through a red lens or a blue lens is like trying to describe a rainbow using two colors. You can't see the whole picture, you can't solve the problem. And I am dedicated to tearing down this partisanship that we are seeing today and solving the challenges that our community is facing, solving the challenges that our country is facing so that we can stand up together and work towards those issues. It would be my honor to serve you in Congress. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Rosa Calderon.
Good evening. My name is Rosa Calderon, and I'm running to unseat that carpetbagger, Tom McClintock. Yes. I grew up, I've been the only candidate who's consistently lived in this district, so I'm homegrown, and I'm absolutely ready to fight for our home. As you know, District 4 is absolutely enormous and beautiful. It encompasses the beauty of Lake Tahoe, the Sequoia National Forest, Kings Canyon National Park, and the crown jewel of our park system, Yosemite. So through this foothills, the Sierra Nevada, and into the Fresno Valley, because that's how enormous our district is, we have honest, hardworking people and who are law-abiding and who our American dream has truly failed and left behind. I'm fighting and I'm running to restore that. I'm fighting to get money out of politics and to restore our democracy, because as it stands right now, we have lost our voice. What we have in Congress right now are politicians who continue to fight only enough to get elected and re-elected. The minute that they get into office, they start campaigning again. So it leaves them absolutely no time to fight for us. And what we have for our district is someone who's not even one of us. He refuses to move into our district, and I refuse to allow him to continue voting on our behalf and speaking for us. My family came to the United States as refugees from El Salvador, a country where the press was silenced, and anyone who spoke out about the injustices of that country were risking their lives, as my mom did. So she actually crossed every border, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Mexico on foot until she reached the land of opportunity. She was seeking political asylum, but she knew that she was after that American dream. That ability that anyone can make it anywhere in the United States and have that opportunity for upward mobility. What I'm fighting for is to give people a voice, to be the voice for our brothers and sisters, to fight for our unions, to stand strong in their right to negotiate for a fair wage that they can put food on the table and raise their families, to bring equity to our K-12 system because no child's opportunities should be limited by the zip code that they were born into. I'm fighting to give women a voice, a right to choose. I'm fighting to break that glass ceiling once and for all. And I'm fighting to really not just have access to healthcare, but to have real, affordable healthcare through Medicare expansion for all that works for every single American. It is my wish to represent a community where I've grown through this entire area. I've been an activist my entire life. I have been able to work on Kids Count Head Start, a policy council for early childhood development. I've been invested in my daughter's education. Today I teach as a science mentor in the public schools, as a volunteer, and in hope to inspire the next wave of engineers and data scientists, because we need women in science. And I also believe that it is time that our Congress reflects the diversity of this nation, and we need more women in Congress, because 20% is just not enough. I hope that you join my fight. I've been endorsed by Justice Democrats, Brand New Congress, the Free Thought Equality Fund, and most recently the California Latina Democrats. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that I'm able to answer all your questions tonight.
Okay, from this point then, we will hold the applause, okay? Okay. All right, since Ms. Bateson got to start with the intro, the first question goes to Ms. Morris. What makes you the most qualified candidate to take on McClintock, and what is your strategy to combat him?
So I am homegrown and local, and McClintock is from Southern California. But also I have the advantage of coming from a large rural Republican family in our district. So I have been messaging across the aisle very effectively for my entire life. And I have managed to get 100 of my Republican relatives on board with my campaign. And what we saw out in Virginia, you know, where we saw a lot of women first-time candidates flip house seats, we saw them come out with strong campaigns, with a message that was community-focused, solution-oriented. We saw them come out with the right resources to get that message out, and finally build a strong grassroots foundation and a well-organized field operation. So I have a message that is bridging the partisan divide and reaching Republicans effectively. We have, we've out-fundraised Tom McClintock. Last quarter was my first quarter out. I raised $268,000. That came from over 1,000 individual contributions. That's more than anyone has raised in an election cycle against Tom McClintock since he has been in office. And so what that means is that we are going to have the resources to run a competitive campaign that can out-message him. And what that fundraising did is it actually got us onto the DCCC national target list. It allowed other outside groups to say, actually, McClintock is vulnerable and Jessica can beat him. So we have executed a strategy to get national attention on our race, and it's working. Because we're going to need that national support, just like they had in Virginia, to be able to flip this seat. Finally, a strong field operation is critical. I've worked as a field organizer before on campaigns very effectively. I know how to bring together an army. We just hired our field director, who's actually a 4th generation native of Coarse Gold, and who actually flipped one of the House seats in Virginia with a 30-point margin. And so it was a huge victory. And so we're bringing in the best and the brightest to help organize the grassroots effort that you guys are standing on the front lines and doing. And finally, it's really about inspiring people. You know, I was really honored to get selected by a group called The Arena, and they are Obama 2008 political strategists who selected 10 candidates in the country to support, and I'm one of them. So we're bringing national attention, national support. We have the resources and we have the team to be able to flip this House seat, and I hope you'll join me. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Calderon.
My strategy has been fairly simple. I represent everything that McClintock is not. So I'm homegrown, I've lived in this district, I've actually been at his door for over 3 years. If you recall that town hall in February, that's a town hall that I not organized, but I also led. When he called and got us national attention by calling every one of his constituents anarchists and radicals because we are demanding answers, that was my protest. So he knows me. He knows that I'm already a threat. And I'm going after the people who support him the most. I know that the key to gaining this seat with a 15-point margin is by reaching out to the other side. I've been extremely successful as reaching out to our Republican counterparts and even the far right. I've been able to be invited a few times to the state of Jefferson and once to the Tea Party, who I know now I'm a target of down in the Central Valley. So our message is coming across, and it's not just coming across as Rosa Calderon, who's this liberal, progressive person, but I'm talking about the issues that truly affect our community. When they did a survey through Sarah Forward, the 3 top issues are progressive issues. We're talking about education, the lack of economic opportunities, and we're also talking about getting money out of politics. And that's where I differ the most from McClintock. You will never, ever hear me brag about how many hundreds of thousands or millions I've raised. I have made it my point to only fundraise locally with small donations because we need to emphasize that money is not a driver for success in politics. For me to give you a voice is to pull those dollars out of this seat. And that's exactly what I intend to do. We're uniting every single person. This is all entirely grassroots. Our entire campaign has been running off of volunteers who work tirelessly and endlessly, and we are getting that national attention. We have been on the Young Turks. We have 3 national endorsements. We have 4 unions who are coming forward in January to do a pre-endorsement, and that's how we're going to get rolling. I am here to just represent the people and no one else.
Okay, Ms. Bateson.
Thank you. So I actually started off in this race trying to recruit candidates to run against McClintock. And I thought that education is an issue that unites us here in our district. I was even talking to some of my former teachers. They said no, but one of them turned around and sent me an email that was very persuasive. He said, look, Regina, you're from here, you have your roots here in the community, you really know people in our district, but you've got the national and international experience necessary to be an effective advocate. And you're qualified to lead at this time when we need new leaders, we need fresh voices advocating for us. And that wasn't enough to persuade me. But then I went to a Tom McClintock town hall just a few days later. That's enough to push anybody over the edge. And I'll tell you that I've never seen someone treat their constituents with such disdain. And I thought about the good people of our district, I thought about my own kids, and I decided, yes, I do need to put myself out there. So we got started with a very grassroots model, doing small online donations here in the district, and it's literally because of that outpouring of support that I became a candidate and have launched this really successful, strong campaign. As I said before, I think that I'm the most qualified candidate in this race because I have the local roots and ties to large institutions here in our district, but also a national and international record of accomplishment. I was in the Foreign Service and led a visa fraud prevention unit. I went on to become an internationally recognized expert on post-war reconstruction and security issues. And so I bring to the table the grassroots organizing and the commitment to people here, but also the skills and credibility to get the job done. We have been getting national media attention since the summer. We were on NPR nationally even. We've been doing the serious fundraising, also raising more than $250,000 to date. But I am completely committed to people here. And I am also, I think, in the best position to beat McClintock because I'm the only candidate running who's made credible commitments to bipartisanship. I've committed to join the Problem Solvers Caucus, and I'm absolutely determined to stand up for Republicans and Democrats alike in this district. That is how we win next year.
Thank you. The next question will start with Ms. Calderon. If either of the others who didn't go first need me to repeat the question, please ask. Okay. Are you able to provide us with an example where you took action to solve a problem and therefore benefited somebody else?
Absolutely. So I have been dedicated to being a public servant. You know, I really do believe in public leadership and being a servant leader. Being a servant leader means that you have this drive to serve. And because you're serving, you see this need to lead. And that's what I've been doing my entire life. I've been an activist. I've been, as I mentioned, in policy councils, in clubs, in committees just to get everyone ahead. What we see right now in Congress is a Congress that really gets in there for self-promoting purposes. And that's not right. What I'm doing right now is fighting for the people. As an activist, there is no self-fulfilling prophecy for me. In fact, we never ever get credit. And that's exactly what we need. We need someone in Congress who has done this before without ever receiving a paycheck. I have been an activist since the movement of Occupy and today through Indivisible. My goal in this district is to give everyone a voice, whether that means that I'm going to continue advocating on our behalf or getting behind another candidate who is strong, that will do that for us. That's what I propose to do. But outside of that, I truly believe that stepping outside of my comfort zone is the most important thing. Just recently, as I mentioned, I have been invited to speak at the state of Jefferson. They allowed me, kind of went out on the limb themselves, to give me a platform so I could give my stuff. And so they invited me again. You know, I was there to just give a 3-minute stump, but it turned into 3-hour conversations of the policies that I would oppose. And they asked me if I would support them. And I said, you know, I don't know enough about you to support you. I know of you. So they invited me to one of their meetings. And so I went to their meeting to hear them out, to see what they're about. And regardless of where they've come in life or where they've come from in life, the message that I received is that they seek representation. And I am completely devoted to meeting every single group. I've reached out to religious groups, to knitting groups, to find out what matters to them. We're knocking every door, and I'm going to find a message of unity because it is the people who are uprising, and we need to have our government support us. Thank you.
Ms. Bateson?
Thank you. So I have spent my life fighting for the rights of ordinary people and the rights of others. When I was in the Foreign Service, I was a consular officer. So I did visa interviews, I led our visa fraud prevention unit, and I also helped American citizens who were abroad with serious problems that involved directly responding to everything from homicides to sexual assaults to people who had major medical emergencies and needed to be medevaced out of the country. And I really had to step up and find solutions, often very independently, to help those folks in some of the most difficult moments of their life. But I'd actually like to share with you a different example of a time when I really had to look hard and show some creativity and some ingenuity. I've always believed that each of us has an obligation to look at our own skills and our own background and try to make the biggest impact that we can right now in politics, and I've felt that way my entire life. So I'll tell you that when I was in college, I realized that Stanford has a legal aid clinic, and that's located in East Palo Alto, which had a large Spanish-speaking immigrant community. I speak Spanish very well. I had done an exchange program in high school. I had worked abroad in college in Chile, and I realized that there were all these students, just like me, who wanted to do good in the community and who knew Spanish very well. And then there were lawyers and law students who didn't, and clients who needed those services. So I actually started a volunteer interpreter program to be able to ensure that Spanish speakers in that community could access the legal services that they needed. We handled everything from workers' rights cases to landlord-tenant disputes to domestic violence. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I recently happened to go by a restaurant that was involved in the very first case I ever interpreted for. There was a man who had been burned on pizza ovens when he was taking pizzas out of a restaurant. And I knew that place. They have really good pizza. But I stopped going there and have never gone since because they told him that because he was undocumented, he couldn't access workers' compensation, that they weren't going to pay for his care. I thought that was wrong. I stood up for him. We got his case resolved, and I helped establish a program that continued for years after that, helping others.
Ms. Morris?
A couple years ago, I served as the advisor to the 4-star admiral at U.S. Pacific Command. That's our military headquarters for Asia. And I was in charge of the U.S.-India defense relationship. And one day the admiral said to me, he said, Jessica, our troops our Navy is doing double time in the Indian Ocean. We're having to respond to everything in South Asia. And I want India to step up and partner with us, but they're not coming to the table. And he was about ready to give up on trying. We had tried everything to get them to be a partner with us. And my entire goal in life is to try to keep our troops at home. You know, how do we relieve the pressure on our military? And so I thought, okay, I need to figure out how to get India to be a better partner. So I went out to India, and I discovered that their defense minister was an elected official, and his constituency really didn't like America very much. And so I thought, well, how do we give this guy a political win? I discovered that that community needed access to energy, they needed job creation, and they were having an invasive species problem that was crippling their economy. Sound familiar? And so I came back to Pacific Command, and I said to our team, I said, I discovered that we actually had the technology to turn their invasive species into a jet fuel, into biofuel. And so I rewrote the entire U.S.-India defense strategy around using renewable energy technology transfer to get India to the table. So I stood up in front of a room of about 40 admirals and generals, and I was the only woman in the room, the youngest by 20 years, which when you have a career in national security strategy, that's very typical. Makes me very well prepared for Congress. And I said to them, I pitched this strategy, and they loved it. And it became the U.S.-India defense strategy. It worked and got India to the table. And afterwards, after I left that briefing, somebody pulled me aside and said, Jessica, it took a lot of guts to stand up in front of those guys and talk about plants. But it's because it was a good solution and it was a good strategy and it actually worked. Thanks.
All right, question number 3. Ms. Bateson, you get to start. This is a student question. The subject will not surprise you as a student question. The legalization of recreational marijuana in California and other states leads to direct conflict with federal law. What are your views on legislation and how this conflict should be resolved?
So in my research in Guatemala, there we go. In my research in Guatemala, where I've actually spent years on the ground, I've directly researched organized crime and been in contact with narco-traffickers, and I understand how corrosive organized crime can be for institutions and communities. Now, with the legalization of marijuana, we have a very different situation here. But the parallel that I see is that when you have a cash economy, you have people who can't insure valuable products, in this case, valuable agricultural products. You have people transporting sometimes tens of thousands of dollars around in cash. That can invite crime and violence and instability. And we need to be very cognizant of that and work to prevent that here in our district. Calaveras County, which is an epicenter of cultivation, has had some really serious problems and even homicides that have been linked to the drug trade. So I think that at the federal level, the most important thing we need to do is ensure that we have a banking system that folks in the cannabis industry can access, that they can access insurance, they can access banking. There are a variety of different solutions we could use to get there. One idea that I think could work is allowing states to form state charter banks that would get those growers into the formal banking system. Because we know that when folks have their money off the bank, there's no need to be defending someone, someone really being very defensive about their house and keeping firearms there and thinking that someone's going to break in and steal their money. When folks can access insurance, there's no need to be so defensive and reactive about their property. So in my mind, I think that the federal government should accept the decisions of the states, should accept this is where a majority of the country is going, and needs to be realistic about the challenges. And I see the first and foremost challenge being getting that money into the formal banking system that has important positive consequences for law enforcement, for all our safety, and for making sure that organized crime doesn't become linked to legal marijuana cultivation here in California.
Ms. Morris?
In the aftermath of the Butte fire, where we had 800 homes lost, a lot of those homeowners who didn't have insurance were offered bags of cash from cannabis growers and handed over their property. And so that's why Calaveras County became one of the sort of hotbeds of cannabis cultivation in our region. And the county issued permits to try to capture some of the growth in that, but it's created this by having it illegal at the federal level, it has encouraged this to continue to be a cash-based economy, which means that that the current cannabis growing industry is really a good front for money laundering and is inviting cartels and organized crime. So the question we have to ask for these counties that have issued permits that are allowing it, how do we allow it to be a crop rather than a criminal culture? And some of the other burdens is that by having it illegal at the federal level, you don't have oversight over the use of water or the use of pesticides. And so it's creating environmental hazards. You're not catching mites and other insects that we are very careful about with our California crops. Those aren't being caught because UC Davis won't actually look at a mite that comes off of a cannabis plant. And so we need to change this. And I don't think we should legalize it at the federal level. I think that would be an incredibly hard lift and a big discussion that we would have to have as a country. What I think we could do is pass a states' rights law that allows states that have legalized a particular crop to have a federal exemption, so that then our cannabis growers could put their money into FDIC regulated banks, and it would no longer be a front for money laundering, that we would have oversight over the environmental and water standards and pesticides, and we could treat this and manage it for the counties that have approved it like a regular crop rather than a criminal culture. I had a really fascinating discussion one day with the Cannabis Growers Alliance and the Wine Growers Alliance in Calaveras County to try to understand the root of some of the challenges that they're having. And it occurred to me that the wine growers were essentially in the same spot that the cannabis growers were in 100 years ago under Prohibition. And that the result of Prohibition was the mafia and organized crime. And so what we want to do is eliminate organized crime from our community and find a safe way to move forward for the counties that have made this decision.
Ms. Calderon?
So I went to Humboldt State for school, and when I was up there's a few things that I realized. One of them was that the cannabis industry up there is very, very strong. A lot of the students who couldn't afford school would just drop out mid-year and say, I'm going to go up the hill and work for a grower. Outside of that, there were other things that were happening. There was human trafficking. A lot of people were coming from Ethiopia, essentially a new wave of slavery that was being done by the cannabis industry. The other one was because a lot of the states are moving forward with legalizing cannabis, then the federal government doesn't really have the power to, or the funds really, to continue pursuing after these growers. And so it left a lot of these people with no oversight at all. And it did. It had a lot of harsh environmental impacts with pesticides, with crime. This affected our forest rangers, who would sometimes have to do stops on Highway 36 or the 299, while a lot of these things were being trafficked across. And it created dangers. We saw a lot of deaths for our law enforcement as well, to the point where the sheriffs and the local forest rangers decided they weren't going to pursue this any longer. So it kind of left them as a free-for-all. I myself also met with the Cannabis Alliance of California, and I assisted one of my greatest friends who's doing research for the cannabis industry down in San Diego University. And what we have found is that it is due time that the federal government does come forward, because all these states are pushing forward and they can no longer continue to turn a blind eye to what is happening. And with the problem with having a cash basis economy for this is that it continues to provide ways to influence crime. And that is exactly what we want to get away from. And if we have something like charter banks through the state of California, and then we have those exemptions at the federal level, it is no better or easier than just allowing the federal government to decriminalize marijuana growers and make it an agricultural product so that we can have some regulation and oversight.
Thank you. Ms. Morse, you're first. How will you get moderate Republicans to vote for you? What specific stances on issues do you think will appeal to Republicans, Independents, and Democrats altogether?
I think we need to stop looking at each other as Republicans or Democrats, but start looking at each other as members of a community working together to solve problems. I came down here and volunteered at the Detweiler, after the Detweiler fire, at one of the relief centers for a couple days, with many of you in this room, actually. And I saw how this community came together to rise to the challenge, to support one another. No one walking into that facility, into that center, was asking, are you a Republican or a Democrat? You know, everyone was seeing themselves as a member of a community responding to a crisis and supporting one another. And so this is a paradigm shift that we as a society, and we have to take for our politics. We need to start holding up a higher standard. We need to look at what's the impact on our community rather than which party is advocating for it. And so McClintock is someone who has been consistently promoting only his party line, and he's promoting only his political philosophy, and he's not representing our community. He has a political philosophy that the government should do nothing, and there is a cost to doing nothing. There is a price that we are paying for ignoring these challenges and allowing them to go unchecked. Let me give you an example. The Butte fire cost $72 million to contain. It cost $2,000 to build the fire break outside of the town of McCallamy Hill 2 years earlier that saved that town from the Butte fire. A $100,000 investment into fire breaks and forest management and forest thinning would have saved our community. You know, you start thinking also about homelessness is a great example. This is a community that rose to the occasion, spent 5.5 years supporting your homeless population out of your own pockets, feeding this community day after day. This is a community that understands what it means to support each other. And, you know, I was talking to the town of Placerville. They actually calculated the cost of their homeless population. It costs $35,000 per homeless person per year. Actually solving that problem cost them about $10,000, and they managed to get 10 out of their 30 homeless people into permanent homes and jobs, saving their town $350,000 a year. Everyone can understand the concept of saving money by solving problems, and that's what I'm working towards.
Ms. Calderon?
The way that we reach out to Democrats, moderates, and independents, and even the far right, is by finding those common values. And I truly do believe that we do have that. We have things, you know, we've been knocking door to door for the past 2 months, and as I'm approaching these doors, I don't know whose door I'm going to be knocking on. I have made sure that we are knocking every single door, not just going through a list of Democrats and asking for their vote this election again. So sometimes I'll come up and we'll see the rebel flag, and we kind of already know what's going to happen when we approach the door. But we also know that I can talk to them about my daughter's education. I can talk to them about our environment. Right now, that is a thing that has become nonpartisan. Before, I am a scientist. I'm a geoscientist, and most of my work is in the environmental industry. So before, when we used to talk about climate, we used to talk about rising sea levels and the temperatures of the waters. But today, I can ask people in this community to look outside their window. And they can look at the millions of trees that have been affected by the bark beetle infestation. They are looking to their government to help them remove these trees from their homes, because the bark beetle infestation has more problems than just environmental impacts that resulted from the drought. What it does, it has created an insurance policy problem where insurance policies are now looking at your homes through remote sensing imagery. So they basically capture a satellite image of your property and see that you haven't done your due diligence of clearing your property, your area, and they'll send you a cancellation notice. Well, out of those 800 homes, only 18 have been rebuilt because of insurance policies that were able to help. So that has created one problem. The second problem that has created is a shortage of housing. We have a housing shortage in this area, and it's not just a housing shortage in this area, it's throughout the state of California. Now we have the fires that are fueling California, and it's creating a homeless problem and a housing shortage for many people and many communities. So that's the second thing to address. So we really have to look at things that affect communities, not just as a Republican or as a Democrat, but as a community as a whole. Thank you.
Ms. Bateson.
So I'm sorry, I keep forgetting to turn this on. I reach out to all voters in this district, whether moderate Republicans, no party preference voters, or Democrats, in 3 ways. First, by starting from a position of respect. In my own work, I've had to sit down with both human rights violators and their victims. I've had to have really hard conversations with people whose views would seem to be really opposed to each other. But I've learned that if you start from a position of respect and engagement and being inquisitive toward the person, you can have a solid conversation with just about anybody. So I am absolutely committed to not attack people's identities, but to try to engage with them on the issues that they care about. That leads me to the second approach, which is focusing on the values that we share. You know, I'm running for Congress to stand up for what's right. After the 2016 election, I looked at my 3 kids and I said, I can't have them growing up in a world where bullying is the norm. That's not a partisan view. So many of our Republican voters agree with that. And they've also looked around and they have realized that their kids are going to ask them down the road, what did you do after the 2016 election? What did you do to stand up for what's right? That is an appeal that is drawing people out and bringing people to our campaign. Finally, on issues, we have practical, tangible needs here in our district, and I'm running to solve those problems and to give people a real partner in the federal government, a voice in Washington. We need affordable health care. We have a representative who voted to take health care away from 79,000 people in our district. It's unacceptable. We need somebody who's committed to fighting climate change, which is an imminent threat to our well-being and our economy here. And we need someone committed to fiscal responsibility. I know we have to put our people first and have our priorities straight, but I am against wasteful government spending, and Tom McClintock isn't. He says he's fiscal conservative. He is actually fiscally irresponsible. He's voted to shut down our government. He votes against common sense appropriations bills that would allow us to plan to spend responsibly in the future. And that message is drawing Republicans out. We had a 250-person holiday party just this past weekend, and about 25% of the people there, we estimate, were Republicans. And they all saw each other and realized they have so much in common, and they're looking for a new alternative in 2018.
Thank you. We have yet another student question. Ms. Calderon, we get to start with this one. What is your opinion of Mr. Trump's decision to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
I'm so glad you asked that. I've been an advocate for Palestine for over a decade, and I have participated in the boycott for over 7 years now. The news that the capital was going to be not just moved, the embassy was going to be moved, but he was going to proclaim Jerusalem as the capital of Israel is very problematic. What we saw on yesterday, actually that's when he did it, is that he's actually fueling more fights and more violence in that region. That region of Palestine and Israel, everyone has come to consensus that no one will name the capital of Jerusalem for either side until there is a diplomatic solution and negotiations for Palestinians and Israeli conflict. But we have politicians on both sides who have retrenched really hard-line positions and have decided that there will be no solution. And what it has left us with is 2 failed states. Now, over time, I have always proposed for a one-state solution, because what has happened is that we've continued to fund Israel with military missiles and military funding. We just approved the MOU, the Memorandum of for Understanding, yes, and for $38 billion, and $35 million of that is just going to go to their military, and $5 million is going to go to their dome. So over time, we have really funded the genocide of the Palestinians. Now there's only slivers of Palestine left, and there really is no way to offer a two-state solution. So the only way to move forward from this is to invest that money that we're spending to that region and really invest in diplomatic opportunities, humanitarian efforts, to bring in real answers so that we can have one democratic state that doesn't create a second-class citizen on the basis of religious beliefs or their ethnicity. And that's what's happening right now. With the naming of Jerusalem as capital of Israel, it is giving that one upper hand to Israel. And the only way that we will ever find peace in that region is if Palestinians are given the opportunity to have negotiation at the same level as Israelis.
Thank you, Ms. Bateson.
Right. Trump's decision is utterly reckless and is yet another example of what happens when we have an impulsive, irresponsible leader who makes foreign policy by tweets and who has driven out about 30% of the career ambassadors in the State Department. He is both gutting our diplomatic service and completely disregarding the advice of experts who have been working hard to find a solution to the intractable conflicts in the Middle East for decades. I mean, I was just reading that I think it was all but 2 of the last 11 U.S. ambassadors to Israel disagreed with this decision and the way that it was implemented. This is yet another example of Trump's reckless proclamations that are endangering our security. And I think that you deserve a representative in Congress who is going to speak out on these issues, who is going to stand up for a sane and reasonable foreign policy that is going to keep us safe. And as a former Foreign Service officer and a former diplomat, I can assure you that I will do that. But Tom McClintock, let's look at what he's said about Trump's leadership and his decision-making in foreign policy. Even when McClintock was dangerously provoking North Korea, even when Trump was dangerously provoking North Korea, McClintock gave an interview with Calaveras Enterprise and praised his leadership, said he had exactly the right strategic judgment and was exercising exactly the right strategy, that he was showing North Korea who's boss and North Korea was going to listen. We've seen that that hasn't worked. They've continued to launch missiles that reach farther and farther, far enough even to strike the east coast of the United States potentially. A foreign policy based around reckless aggression, where our State Department, our diplomats, and our top advisors have no idea what the president is going to say next, is precisely the opposite of what we need. So I would do everything in my power as your representative to speak out against these types of decisions. But more importantly, I think we need to get McClintock out of office because he is emboldening and empowering this kind of dangerous leadership.
Ms. Morse?
This is a direct threat to the diplomats and the lives of their children who are serving in the Middle East and around the world right now. And what this has done is it has invited terrorist attacks on the U.S. It has handed propaganda to Islamic extremist groups for them to recruit people and to use it against us. Moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem would make that embassy the largest terrorist target in the world, and it would also currently makes all of our embassies in the Middle East prime terrorist targets right now. And having served in Ethiopia and Nepal and Baghdad and India and Myanmar, in these embassies, I understand the risks that are involved with being a diplomat representing our country around the world, but it is incredibly dangerous what they are doing right now, and it's not just our diplomats, it's their children. In Jordan is currently a post where you can bring your kids and it's okay. I have served in all 3 branches of the U.S. national security strategy, which is defense, development, and diplomacy. Now, these are seen as 3 equal pillars of a stool. 3 equal pillars. And right now, what the Trump administration is doing is cutting off 2 of the 3 legs of that stool. They are defunding defense and development. They are setting us up for failure around the world, which means all of the burden falls onto our military. And it is not fair and it's not appropriate. Our military understands that having an investment in preventative activity and preventative diplomacy is cheaper and keeps our troops at home. You know, asking our military to step into these roles of development or defense means that we are asking essentially a hammer to do the job of a nail, and it doesn't work. We need all three to be supporting each other. And when I was working at the State Department doing federal budget funding, I'll save that story for another time. But anyway, we need, yes, this is reckless, it's unacceptable, and I will fight it tooth and nail.
Thank you, Ms. Bateson. You're first on the next question. It is very easy for wealthy U.S. citizens to avoid paying a fair share of their income tax obligations by setting up bank accounts, secret trusts, and fake corporate registrations in other countries. To stop this legal evasion of taxes, what kind of legislation would you sponsor or co-sponsor to address this issue?
So I absolutely believe that we do need to take action. This affects money laundering. It affects the ability, or excuse me, taking these types of evasive actions prevents some of our wealthiest taxpayers from paying their fair share here in our country and contributing to programs that are so important for all of us here in society. So I think that we need strong regulations and a system of taxation that takes into account everyone's needs and obligations. If we look at the tax reform that's out there right now, our country is moving in precisely the wrong direction. Right now, the changes that are being proposed, 75% of the benefits would go to people who are in the top 5% of the income distribution. That does absolutely nothing to address the question that you've asked. Instead, I think we need to be passing legislation and fighting for legislation that improves regulation and transparency. You know, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, for example, needs to be fully staffed. It needs to be headed by somebody who is committed to regulation and committed to strong oversight of our banking system. Our Treasury Department needs to be fully staffed at the levels appropriate in order to be investigating exactly the problem that you've highlighted. And in fact, right now, what we've seen from the administration is a complete abdication of those responsibilities. In so many of our federal agencies, the inspectors general and these mid-level and senior level supervisors who should be leading those types of investigations, those posts are empty. The Trump administration has failed to fill so many of the vacancies, and so these agencies do not have the leadership that they need to be to undertake the investigations that are necessary. I don't think we've ever seen a presidential administration fail to fill so many posts and intentionally undermine the functioning of our government and its ability to investigate this fraud and evasive behavior. But I do think that we need legislation in the future to try to ensure that those posts get filled one way or another by Congress or by the presidency. Thank you.
Ms. Morris.
We have one of the highest tax rates of developed countries around the world, but we actually have one of the lowest tax revenue to GDP ratios around the world. What that means is that we are not collecting much of our wealth. We are not collecting the right amount of taxes. That means that people are actually figuring out how to evade it, as you're pointing out with your question. And so the question is, we keep talking about let's raise the rates, but it's like raising the walls on a leaky sieve, on a colander. You know, you're not going to be able to collect more until you plug all the holes. So now good economists will tell you that the way to do this is actually an entire sort of restart where we actually put down a value-added tax and de-emphasize income tax. A value-added tax would allow you to tax consumption, and it's really hard to avoid, and it's very easy to collect. Now it's harder to sell politically though. So, but that's what economists would tell you is the right solution for this. Now, what's not the right solution is the tax bill that is being proposed at this exact moment. This tax bill is a behemoth that targets, and it's just vindictive actually. If you look at the amount of legislation in there that is specifically targeting California, it's unconscionable. You know, they allowed deductions for victims of floods and hurricanes, but not victims of earthquake and fire. Who's that targeting? You know, this is not good policy, it's revenge. You know, they took out the allowances for you to deduct your state income taxes off your federal income tax. That impacts 4 out of 10 people in our district at an average price of $5,000 per person. I told Tom McClintock this is not acceptable. I put an op-ed in the Sacramento Bee highlighting how his tax bill is hurting our district. Guess what? Tom McClintock's scared of me because the next day he put out, he actually voted no on the tax bill. So we're going to keep holding his feet to the fire, and our movement's going to actually change his vote.
Thank you, Ms. Calderon.
I think it's fair to agree that we have decided that everyone should be paying their fair share. Corporations have found ways to really transfer their money overseas through these corporate tax loopholes. And that's one of the things that we really need to work hard to close. Many people say that it's impossible, but our tax rate, as Jessica mentioned, is the highest in the world. We charge 38%, but it also gives this incentive for them to find ways to move and maneuver their money overseas. And we don't really do much about it. In fact, 5 of the largest corporations, including Apple and Google, who have really had skyrocketed profit margins in this last 2 quarters, they have not paid any income tax in their for the last 5 years, which is unbelievable because we're paying for it. So with this new tax bill, we're talking about $1.7 trillion that they're going to increase our national debt. And if we close those loopholes, it would actually be more than that, and we would be at a surplus. So that's what we really need to work on, is making sure that corporations who really find a way to move their money overseas and keep much more of their money and move jobs overseas are fined so heavily that it would make them even shut down. Because we need to keep our jobs and our money here so that we can continue growing the economy. For them to move the money overseas, it actually hurts our families and it hurts our economy very deeply. And I believe right now over 50% of the population makes less than $30,000 a year. That's unbelievable. We are creating a deficit within our own economy where the average American will not be able to go buy the iPhone, will not be able to go to any other store to stimulate the economy. And we have to start working on that right now. I don't believe that the people have the means to carry these corporations anymore and this corporate welfare. At Walmart, we have the Waltons who make up the top 3, round up the top 3 of some of the richest people in the world. While many of their employees, when they're handed their new employee packet, they're also handed an application to apply for welfare. So now we're giving Walmart welfare twice.
Thank you. Let's see. Next question starts with Jeff. Sorry, Ms. Morris. How would you address climate change issues? Do you support the carbon tax, which will be passed on to consumers?
In our community, we're living on the front lines of climate change. Tom McClintock tweeted out at the president, he said, "Congratulations, POTUS, on pulling out of the Paris Climate Agreement." And this would support working families, is what he said. I tweeted back at him, I said, what about the working families up in Tahoe who rely on our $5 billion a year ski industry, and it was a 34-degree average low last year in the Sierra, which would actually kill our ski industry. And what about those working families? We out here are feeling the direct impact of climate change, and it doesn't matter what you call it, or we can't afford to take the time to have these debates that McClintock wants to have about ice ages and the Middle Ages and the Jurassic era. We need to focus on what is here and present. We need to focus on the bark beetle kill. It wasn't cold enough to freeze off the bark beetle, and so this infestation has gotten out of control. How many people have trees down in their front yards or have taken them out? You know, at $1,000 a tree, it's out of control. We need to be investing in fire prevention and forest health and management, because our homes, our livelihood, our families, and our communities are at risk when we have devastating forest fires take out our communities. You know, we need to be investing in smart water strategy. We need to invest in high alpine wetland restoration so that we can protect our water at its source. Guess what all of these investments do? They start building carbon sinks. Our forests are healthier, they start taking carbon out of the atmosphere. We need to invest in innovative local strategies that start investing in renewable energy, which creates local jobs, like biomass, for example. We need to start investing in areas in innovative technologies, such as taking cattle manure and the bark beetle kill, which is a group called the Marine Carbon Project has proposed this. You combine it into a mulch, it creates, so you can put it on burnout areas, and it helps revitalize the forest, and it creates a carbon sink. And it starts taking carbon out of the atmosphere rather than having methane put it back in. So we need innovative strategies and solutions. I could clearly talk about this all night, but it's our communities at stake, and we need to solve it.
Ms. Calderon?
The carbon tax, it will only be effective if the fees imposed are high enough to be really disabling. And that's something that we really need to think about, because the cost is going to be passed on to the consumer. We all know this. No corporation is going to want to take that on. As a geoscientist, I have analyzed and seen the data, and I know that the climate change that we're experiencing right now is anthropogenic. Through my work, I was actually very lucky to have landed in North Dakota and the Bakken during the peak of the oil boom that happened out there. And because of my research, I was hired on as a geologist on site. So I was able to map the lithology and map the well sites as we were drilling. So because of the impacts that I saw in the environment and in the cultures there, I propose creating an indefinite moratorium for drilling, not just in North Dakota, but in Alaska and in many other regions of the United States. What does that look like? I want to make sure that we are investing in green energy to move forward so that we are not dependent on imports. One of the things that not many people speak about, because they have not lived out there in North Dakota or on those drill job sites, is that we can actually create all of those drill sites into geothermal producing energy agents. And that is something that oil companies are already looking into. We should propose that they continue looking at that so that we can have that renewable energy resource. And that's just one of the solutions that we have. Here in this area, as you know, we have the bark beetle infestation, and one of the things that we can work on is creating a way to remove the dead vegetation and transporting it out. So one of the reasons why many of you probably have had trees removed, just chopped up in blocks and just left in front of your property, is because it defeats the purpose of removing the trees entirely and taking them to incinerators elsewhere. So what we need is like a small army of incinerators. What we have proposed is about 13 through the Sierra Nevada, to make sure that when we are removing those trees, that we are being able to incinerate them right then and there and start working on those biofuels in small sections throughout the district.
Ms. Bateson?
All right, so I want to start with a question. How many of you understand that climate change is real? Okay, good number of hands. Now here's what you might be surprised to learn. A strong majority of people in our district already agree with you. We know from high-quality surveys that 69% of adults in our district understand climate change is real. 81% want to see the federal government investing in renewable energy. The only question is, why are we all being represented by one of the most outspoken climate change deniers in Congress? Why is a Koch-funded climate change denier with a 0% rating from the League of Conservation Voters representing Tahoe and Yosemite? There is no good reason, except that people have not run a strong enough campaign against him. And this is one of the main reasons why I have launched my campaign, actually. I understand the need to be supporting adaptation in our rural communities, making sure that homeowners and small business owners alike can deal with the consequences of a changing climate, which are affecting our well-being, our safety, and our livelihood here. I know we need to be supporting green energy jobs and renewable energy initiatives at the local level. Even Yosemite has just gotten zero emissions buses. South Lake Tahoe and Truckee have voted to go 100% renewable in just a few years. We should be applauding and supporting those efforts, but that's not enough. And people sometimes ask, what makes the Democrats running for Congress different? This is one area where I am different. I am also committed to taking action at the federal level to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is the root cause of all these other negative downstream consequences we're living here. I support a carbon fee, which comes along with a carbon dividend. that would return an average of $2,000 a year to the average American family. So it's not just fees, it's also money going straight back to American families. And it's large-scale polluters who pay those fees. And we benefit our economy in the long run, we protect our well-being, we protect ourselves from forest fires. This is a smart investment in our community. I'm also the only person here who's committed to joining the Climate Solutions Caucus. This is a bipartisan issue. That caucus is 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats, and committed to action now because we need it and our district needs it.
Thank you. Okay, here's a tough question. If you are not the Democratic nominee, what are you willing to do to support the actual nominee against McClintock? And which of the other two candidates would you most favor?
That is false.
It's not my question. Ms. Calderon, you get to go first.
So I think we all represent a little bit of a spectrum of Democrats. You know, not all Democrats are created equal. And I would represent the most progressive Democrat at the table. I believe that we can work for the people, represent the people, and just like Abraham Lincoln said, have a government by the people and hope that it'll never perish. In my level, I believe that if I'm not the candidate that can take on this district and take us to the White House, the Capitol, that I would probably step down and support the strongest candidate. And not only that, but I want to make sure that I support other women candidates running in other congressional districts because the support for other women is very small, and that support gets smaller and smaller for women of color. And that is something that I'm dedicated to do, just not only in this race, but after this race and from here on. The candidate that I would mostly support, because we do have a few issues that we align in, would be Jessica. Jessica has mentioned that she would support something like single payer. And that's kind of where I stand right now. I think that answers the question, so I'll leave that whole minute extra.
Ms. Bateson?
So I absolutely believe that the best way to beat Tom McClintock is to get one Democrat endorsed as your Democratic candidate, either at the conference that happens in January or at the state convention in February, and then to put one Democrat on the ballot in June and turn that June election into the first round of the general election. As you can see here, all across our district, we have people who are fired up and upset about Tom McClintock. You don't need to wait until November to vote against him. It's very confusing, but the June election has the potential to be a head-to-head competition between one endorsed Democrat and Tom McClintock. And it's this amazing gift to us because we can organize our people and get out and show that we can get more votes than him, that this district is incredibly competitive. And that will help us get the national attention, the media attention, and the resources that we need to really win in November. So yes, if someone else is the endorsed candidate for the Democratic Party, I will support that person and step out of the race at that point. I think there's strong arguments why our campaign is in the best position to actually beat McClintock, but that's what I think is the rational, responsible thing to do. I would absolutely work with organizations like Sierra Forward that's doing tremendous work across our district, would try to marshal my resources that we've amassed in support of the candidate and the broader goal of beating McClintock. You know, in terms of who I most agree with or who I most supported, I would actually say that for a long time I felt that I most supported Rochelle Wilcox, who has decided not to be a candidate at this point. But I had a lot of respect for her and still do. She has an absolutely ironclad background. She's a leading First Amendment lawyer, which is an issue that's really important to me also. And I felt that she was somebody who really could have been a very strong voice for our region. That said, you know, I don't have strong feelings on the issue, and the real answer is, who would I support? I would support the endorsed candidate of the Democratic Party. But I also, you know, I'm asking for your support, honestly, in that endorsement process. So it's a bit of an awkward question, as I'm sure everyone can understand.
Ms. Morris?
So I'm committed to serving my community. So you can count on me for being here for the long haul. You know, I spent my career dedicated to serving my country. 10 years overseas, around the world, working in some of the toughest spots. And my family spans the geographic and socioeconomic spectrum of this district. And every time I would go overseas, I would think, but I would like to be home. You know, I would hear about the challenges that they were having at home, and when I would come home, because I'll confess, Baghdad never really felt like home. And so when I would come home, I would see these challenges, and so a few years ago I started talking with some of our county supervisors, some of our local elected mayors, about thinking about stepping up and being ready to run, and what that would look like for me to come home and serve this community that I love and adore, that it has raised me. And now that's what I'm doing. You know, after the last election, I saw what happens to women when they run for office. Their records get distorted, rumors start about them. It is like volunteering to be eaten by wolves, essentially. And I thought, I have to do this. I have to step up and run, because I've survived Baghdad. I've hiked 500 miles of the PCT by myself. I'm really tough. And I thought, we are never going to change this political culture that is gotcha politics, that's nasty, that's undermining people, unless people with real integrity, who are willing to be public servants first, not politicians, who are willing to serve our community and don't have to undermine others to be able to win. That is the change that we are doing, and that is why I am running for office, because I am here serving our community. So you can count on me. I'm not going to go away. If I don't get this, if I don't get this seat, then I am going to continue to run. I'm going to continue to run, and I'm going to continue to serve in any capacity where I can best serve. In terms of which candidate I would support the candidate that demonstrates shine theory, that doesn't resort to undermining others, starting rumors, backstabbing, or undermining another, because that is the old school politics, and it needs to end. And so we are ushering in together a new era of politics, and it starts today, and it starts with us.
Okay, kudos to you, Rosa, for accurately. Okay, last student question. What is your opinion of the proposed state of Jefferson? Ms. Bateson, you're first.
All right, so I want to tell you guys a story from the El Dorado County Fair that was held in Placerville. Now, it was a really hot day, but our Democrats there were pretty lucky. They had a table in the shade, and the state of Jefferson's table was in the sun. So that was part of the reason why a bunch of the state of Jefferson folks came over to the table where I was talking to people and handing out materials. And I'll tell you that my mom was there too, and she's a nurse. That means she knows everybody in the community, and she's really good at talking with just about anyone. So, you know, we started having a conversation, just talking about what did you do last weekend, and we realized we had a lot in common. Because do you know what those state of Jefferson folks were concerned about? They were concerned about the tree mortality crisis. I mean, they had been out for a hike and told me about how they'd come around a curve and saw a huge stand of dead trees on one of their favorite routes. And one of the adult sons of this woman I was talking to just about started crying and said to her mom, the forest is dying. And, you know, we kept talking, and in that conversation we realized there is so much that unites us. They are yearning for real representation. They're yearning for someone who will stand up for their interests, who can ensure that their kids have access to good education, that there are good paying jobs, and that we're being responsible stewards of our natural environment that we all love. Here's what the state of Jefferson doesn't like. People from LA and people from San Francisco. They feel dominated, right, by those parts of California, and I can understand that. I think we can all understand that because we are being represented by someone from Southern California. So if you talk to some state of Jefferson folks about Tom McClintock, here's what I need you to say. Tom McClintock is from LA. Even if you succeed with your political project, you're still going to be a state. You're still going to need a representative in Congress, and wouldn't you like that to be someone who's actually from this region, who's actually going to stand up for your interests and engage with you? How do you feel about being represented at the federal level by someone from LA? I'm telling you, it's very effective.
I had a nice chat with the state of Jefferson guys at one of McClintock's town halls. They had a booth out front, and so I approached them as I do every member of our community, with a willingness to listen. And I started talking to them, and what I heard from them, I was asking them, why do you want to secede? Why do you want a separate state? And what I realized is that they feel that they don't have representation for rural issues. Guess what? We don't have representation for rural issues because we have Tom McClintock, who is not representing our rural issues. And so I started talking to them about fire prevention, better water management strategy, job creation for their kids here at home, and bark beetle kill. And I found that we had solid common ground. Part of the advantage I had is that I started out my campaign with a 3-month listening tour of our district. I went and met with our county supervisors, local mayors, CAL FIRE chiefs, hospital boards, chambers of commerce, and I listened to make sure that I understood the issues that our district, the rural issues that our community was facing, so that I could be a partner in solving those issues, and that I could find the best ideas and give those ideas a platform that we could project. So I spent 3 months, I did all 10 counties, and I came out with a solid foundation. So it was incredibly natural to have a discussion about the real issues and the real needs of our rural communities with anyone in these communities, any of our neighbors, whether they wear gold and green shirts, saying State of Jefferson, or whether they wear, blue shirts about Democrats, I don't know. Anyway, it is critical to make sure that we are approaching everyone as our neighbor. And I found that when I approached our members of the State of Jefferson as a neighbor, and I took the time to listen and ask them questions, and didn't make an effort to try to convince them of anything, but just demonstrated that I was willing to be a partner, I found we had common ground. And that's the model that we can all apply to all of our neighbors and friends in this community and get them on board with a community-centered campaign.
Ms. Calderon?
My eyes started hurting a little bit after I put on my glasses on. So, I've had a long history with the State of Jefferson. I did go up to school in Humboldt County, and that's one of the hubs for this. Trinity County, Siskiyou County, it's where they have revived the movement. The reason they're reviving the movement is because they truly feel that there is no representation, and of course, many of us know that there are other dividing issues. And so we were at a town hall just this year in Sonora. And the entire place was packed, and I'm one of the founders for Indivisible CA04, so we were out there handing out literature and trying to talk to everyone and telling them that this is a nonpartisan group that has really developed, and we're trying to give a voice back to the people. And there's a large population of State of Jefferson people, and if you have never seen their attire, it's really easy to spot. It's the green shirts with the yellow, and sometimes they wear like kind of camo, so it's easy to spot them. While we were taking our seats, the entire place was packed. People were standing everywhere, and I took my daughter with me. So I go and sit her down with a friend of mine, and then I'm looking around for one spot. I find the one chair in the middle of the State of Jefferson, and I ask them if I can sit down, and they say, sure. And I have this huge box in my arm, and they're like, what do you have in that box? I said, I have my liberal agenda. So I sat down, and I started a conversation with them, and I looked over at their poster board, and I said, your message has changed. At the top of the list, it said inclusivity. That's what they are trying to aim for right now. And then I looked at the redrawn map, and as someone who's a geographer, I said, what is this? You're pulling in the Silicon Valley into your map. So we really started talking about the reasons why they want to basically break off from California. It's not secede because they don't want to secede from the nation. And their effort would really take a constitutional amendment, because in the Constitution it says that no new state will be created from an already existing state. But they're going around all of this, and they're going to do this without our help if we don't reach out to them and find out why they're trying to split up. So, can I just finish super quickly? I have 1 minute before, so. And so, one of the things that they're really focusing on is really running for office. Because we're not giving them a voice, they're going to give themselves a voice. Many of them are running for district supervisors in every county, and they're taking on votes to sign a petition that they want to leave the state of California. In 1860, the state of California decided that they were done giving us representatives. So at that time, they capped the amount of representatives at the state level to 40 senators and 80 assemblymen. Back then, those people were able to represent 6,000 people and 7,500 people. Today, those numbers are 500,000 to 1 million for each representative. So they really have a case. They filed a complaint to the state of California, and when they finally had their day in court with Alex Padilla, the judge asked Alex Padilla what he thought about their claims, and Alex Padilla looked at her because the judge asked additionally, and what have you thought about doing in the case of the lack of representation? And what Alex Padilla said is, we haven't thought about it. That's a huge problem, not just at the state level, but at the federal level, our voices get smaller and smaller. Someone in Wyoming, their vote matters 3.6 times more than ours does here in California because of the lack of representation that we have. And that's exactly what we have to do. Past the issues, we have to look at who is speaking on our behalf and are they hearing us. So when I think about the state of Jefferson, I just think about creating that unifying message and how to get it to create those things that really unite us together. Schools, education, our jobs, our livelihood is at stake right now. So we have to come together and move forward together. Thank you.
Okay, next question. The Southern Sierra Miwok Nation is not officially recognized as an indigenous nation by the United States federal government. The Southern Sierra Miwoks submitted their petition for recognition in 1982. Do you have any opinions on this matter? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
Morris, you start.
Great. Yeah, no, our Miwok tribes were in Yosemite before any of us. You know, these are our tribes that have an indigenous claim because they have been here. So I would absolutely fight and support and be an advocate and an ally for our tribal nations. And we need to respect and support that. I would also be a strong advocate for getting more resources into our tribal communities so that they can have the best opportunities and the best resources. And frankly, I am willing to be a good listener on this, because I'm not going to come in and pretend that I have the answers or that I know what should be done. But I know that I will be an advocate for every member of our community, and I will be an incredibly strong advocate for the members of our community who have been underrepresented and who have been isolated or marginalized, and to make sure that we give every member of our community the best tools and the best way forward. I've seen tribal communities up in Alpine County working really effectively and being an integrated part of the school boards and the chambers of commerce and having leadership roles in local government. I would love to see that type of support be modeled throughout our entire district, so that we can think of ourselves as partners and not as discrete members of society. So anyway, I grew up going down into Yosemite and seeing what a strong foundation our Miwok tribes in particular have in this region, and we need to support that and advocate for them as a community.
Ms. Calderon.
So I'm from Central America, and my family is indigenous. We're Mayan, and in not just down there, but in every nation, we see that the indigenous people do take a second-class citizenship from the new countries or the new civilizations that have established in their homelands. I completely support them to have their being recognized as a tribe. I would work with the Department of Interior to make sure that we are providing the right resources to many of our tribal lands and the councils. In North Dakota, there were a lot of tribes, and if you know about DAPL, then you know what's happening out there. They don't really have control over their lands because many of their lands are just federally protected lands. And even when it comes to reservation lands, then the federal government kind of takes a back seat when it comes to helping them out with education and helping them out with crime assessments. So those are things that we have to work on. When I was up in Humboldt County, I studied the Hoopa and the Wiyats. When I was up there, the Wiyat tribe was actually just having a ceremony that were closed ceremonies, and they had allowed me to come and spend some time as a spectator, and I was the only person that they had allowed to see those ceremonies in over 100 years. What they were celebrating was the return of their property. They had a small island where their entire tribe was massacred, and all of them were essentially ran off. There was 4 actual survivors, and the Hoopa tribe adopted them. The Hoopa tribe really has come forward as one of the tribes that has adopted many of the indigenous people throughout California who were massacred and cleansed of. Yosemite, when we think about someone like Muir, the only reason he thought of the forest without people was to get rid of the indigenous people. And we have to remember things like that. We cannot continue celebrating someone like Muir when we see the impact that it has cost the indigenous populations, the native people who are still suffering to have a voice in their native land. So yes, I would completely support the tribe being recognized, and as I said, I would work with the Department of Interior to make sure that that is done swiftly and quickly, because we can continue this any longer.
Ms. Bateson?
Yeah. So this is clearly an issue where we need to have better engagement with all the communities here in our district, and where people need better representation and better constituent services. Now, I would never claim to be an expert on every single issue out there, but I can tell you that the strength that I bring to the table is that self-awareness and that humility, and the knowledge that I need to seek advice from other experts sometimes. And in this case, I'll tell you who that is and who I get an earful from all the time. That's my own husband, because he's actually a lawyer who's done a lot of work on the sovereign rights of tribes and indigenous people and peoples in Canada, First Nations peoples. So I hear about these issues over the dinner table all the time. And I understand that it's not just a lack of recognition, that for so many other groups, basic rights and very important lands and monuments are under threat. Protections are being rolled back right now by the federal government, supported by Tom McClintock in his position as the chair of the Subcommittee on Federal Lands. And I know that that's unacceptable. I can also tell you that I'm really committed to constructive engagement and constituent services. I've seen what can happen when people are trying to engage with bureaucracy, are trying to advocate for their needs, and things go awry. I mean, we've all probably had an experience where we've sent in an application or have been trying to push for something and we don't get responses back from the government. I've been on the other side of that as a consular officer. I can tell you that people sometimes file their visa applications for their relatives to immigrate to the US, and papers get lost. And it can take a congressional inquiry to make sure that those papers are found. And I'll tell you, when I was a vice consul, if a congressional inquiry came in, we had a limited number of hours to go find the paperwork involved and to make sure we had a concrete, tangible answer. And I once tore apart our office looking for forms that had been lost for years, and they were behind a heavy file cabinet, but we found them. So I understand the need for really effective, strong advocacy to make sure that important matters like this aren't left languishing for decades at a time.
Thank you. Ms. Calderon, can you give us an example of a time when you had to negotiate or compromise with someone who is 180 degrees opposed to your position?
$180 degrees. I think I do this almost daily. I don't think I will ever find someone whose views align directly with mine at every turn. Even as Democrats right now, we're having to find ways to unite ourselves. We have a division. What we saw in the last 2016 election was a country divided on the same issues, but not knowing what direction or path to take. So when I think about a situation where I've had to negotiate with someone a completely 180, well, this could be every single Tuesday in front of Tom McClintock's office. Every single Tuesday we protest and we write a letter, and it's well thought out by so many people who have not given up their efforts of continuing this. We initially had planned for the first 100 days of Trump's presidency, and now we're there still today. So the way that we compromise, sometimes we have hecklers. Every single day. We have one guy who is just incredible. He comes out there, and he's a Tea Party guy, and he wears his shirt that says "a proud deplorable," and he'll stand next to me, and he'll talk to me about the things that matter to him, his family, his wife, and I'm thinking that day by day, there will be one day when he says, "You know what, Rosa, I'm going to vote for you." But every single day, every single time that we're out there, we'll have great conversations. We've taken pictures together, and before he leaves, he lets me know, I'm still voting for McClintock. So I have to compromise. Every time I see him, I have to make sure that I reach out, that I give him that same kindness that I have given him before. And that's true with every other person that I meet. We have 3 incredible candidates that are running for Congress today. And people who I considered my amazing friends don't believe that I may be their candidate and have ran whisper campaigns against me. And I still will let them know that no matter what happens, if I do win, that I will fight for their freedoms and their rights. And that's something that we have to take into consideration ourselves every single day. Kind of, as Michelle Obama said, you know, that when they go low, we go high. And that's something that we have to teach our children so they can continue, so that we can have a working Congress.
Thank you, Ms. Bateson.
Already in the course of the campaign, I've had a lot of conversations that were really constructive with people we might think would be 180 degrees, just diametrically opposed. Dyed-in-the-wool conservatives, climate change deniers, people who voted Republican their entire life and approached me with some hostility. But I reject the notion that we're really so different. I mean, people here do share a commitment to growing and prospering and making our lives better, a civic commitment to our region. So I want to give you an example that's a little bit more dramatic. Probably the time when I really had to negotiate with someone who couldn't be more different than me, and my own life depended on it, which is no exaggeration. So I don't often really talk about some of the personal experiences I've had with violence in my own research, out of privacy concerns and concern for the dignity of other people involved in those situations. But when I started my research for my graduate degree in Guatemala, I did have a situation where I was detained by narco-traffickers. And here was how I was able to handle that constructively. It was by being really prepared. You know, I'd thought through carefully what might happen while I was doing this research. I had done that preparation. I had gotten good advice from people there in the country. And so I had that peace of mind. They told me you have to get the mayor's phone number in whatever town you're doing your research in. That has to be step one. And so I'd done that. I took their advice. And when this happened, I had the mayor's cell phone number, and I pulled it out. And that immediately diffused the situation, because the people I was dealing with who detained me knew who he was, and they knew the number was correct. We didn't even have to call him. The next thing I did was engage with them on a human level. So show them photos, tell them some stories from my life here in California. And lo and behold, they got to laughing, they got to joking. They slowly sort of moved away from me and weren't physically preventing me from leaving anymore. And then I tried to be really open and straightforward with them. And I said, look, this is the nature of the research that I'm doing. I am researching how the Civil War has changed policing here, has changed people's attitudes about crime and security. But I don't think that puts us in any direct conflict with each other. You know, the misunderstanding had been that they thought that I was working for DEA. That's a bad misunderstanding. It doesn't get much worse than that. You know, but we worked through it. And at the end of the day, I said, here is a stack of hundreds of business cards. I want you to give them out to every person that you know, to your friends and associates. And if someone has a problem with me, you can just pick up the phone and call me. There's no need to threaten me. And lo and behold, that worked. And I do sometimes think about that when I'm handing out my business cards here. That was part of where I got into the ethic of just making business cards like confetti, because I'm a really straightforward, transparent person. And I think that the more we're honest and truthful with people and engage with them, we can work through just about any difference.
Ms. Moore?
Yes, I've spent a lot of my career negotiating with sort of opposing sides. And I always ask myself, what is at the root of what they need? Not what they're saying they want, but what is it that they need? What is it that they are aiming for? And how can I help them and us get to a win? Because there's always a way to find a solution working together. So when I worked on the federal budget at the State Department, I had the Iraq Reconstruction portfolio. So that was about $25 billion. I was 25 years old, and all of my colleagues were about 20 years older. And they had given this to me because I had been on the ground. I had seen what had been going on in the field. I had been part of the cleanup crew after the terrible decisions made in 2003 in terms of Iraq development, and we had been working to kind of mitigate that. And we had been working to try to find enough resources to get guys employed so that they wouldn't join the insurgency. That was the basic root of the principle. And when I came home and I was working at the State Department on the appropriations, I went up to the Hill and I was talking with the Senate appropriations staffers, and they chewed me out left, right, and center. I'd been home from Iraq for maybe 3 weeks after a year and a half on the front lines, and they were saying Iraq reconstruction is irresponsible. What's all these big dam projects? Why are you doing this? And just let all of his frustration about America being in Iraq writ large just pour out on me. And it was rather startling, having served my country, having risked my life, to have somebody who was representing our government tell me it wasn't good enough. And so I asked myself, what is it that he really needs? And I recognize that what he needs is a political win. And he needs assurance that this is going to be effective. And this is going to work. And this isn't the old school big dam projects that we've been wasting billions of dollars into. And so the project that I was proposing, I brought a member of the military with me up to our next negotiation. And that assuaged his concerns. He could see that it was in the best interest of keeping our troops safe, of stabilizing the insurgency, and of undermining the fuel for future insurgents. And that allowed our negotiations to go forward effectively.
Okay, next question. Ms. Bateson, how will you keep in touch with voters after you are elected? And will you pledge to never avoid your constituents?
Yes, I will absolutely pledge to never avoid my constituents, unlike someone we know who has literally run away from his constituents, on video, in fact. But in all seriousness, I am really committed to community engagement. And here's the specific promise that I can make to you. That every year, I'll hold one public town hall, at least, in every single one of our counties. And I say at least because, I mean, there's 12 months in the year, we've only got 10 counties. We can double up if we need to, if there are particular issues, particular level of interest, and that's at minimum. But this is the district that I'm from. I grew up here since I was 2 years old. I went to our public schools. I worked all my first jobs here, everything from food service to umpiring. I volunteered at one of the hospitals in Roseville when I was in high school. My mother has worked at the 2 largest hospitals and taught at our community college there. My dad worked at HP, which is a major employer in Roseville, and still is, although a bit smaller. He was one of the people kind of forced out into early retirement. This is where my roots are, this is where my family is, and this is my home. And that is why I'm running for Congress. Is to really stand up for us, for our values, to do what's right, for our family, for our communities, and for our country. There's another real practical reason why you can be assured that I'll be spending a lot of time in the district, even when elected. And that's that my own family would be staying here. We've talked about this very seriously. You'll see on our flyers that I've got 3 young kids and a fantastic husband. And they would remain living in Roseville. And I'd go on the politician flight to DC on a Sunday night. There's one direct flight from Sacramento to DC. And then come back on a Thursday night and work out of district offices. I'm also committed to opening multiple offices. It is unheard of to have only one office for a congressional representative in a district of this size. And it is completely unfair to you all that right now Tom McClintock is only willing to talk to you on his schedule and only sends his staffers down here really infrequently. So I think we need multiple different district offices, at least one town hall in every county every single year. And I'll be back here on all the recesses and all the weekends because my family's going to stay here, assisted by my parents who are in Roseville when I'm in Congress.
Ms. Morris.
The entire reason I'm running is to be able to serve our community. So one of the things I've loved about the campaign thus far, and will continue to love when I'm in Congress, is being able to be a partner with our community, being able to listen, understand the issues, and advocate for them. That is the entire reason I am running for Congress. So I'll have an incredibly open-door policy. And my plan is to come out and be engaged in the community at every level. I've already really enjoyed speaking to high school classes and doing some community service events. One of our campaign plans is to have a community service campaign where we will partner with local churches, local schools, roll up our sleeves and get to work and stand side by side with our community. It's not about, it's not about there's nothing, yeah, anyway, we are supporting our community at our core. And that is what McClintock hasn't done. He has ignored, I was talking to the Republican mayor in Placerville, for example. She said McClintock would not take her meeting when he went out to DC. And I've talked to a number of our elected representatives and local officials who have gone out to DC and gotten a closed door in their face from their alleged representative. This is not good enough. We need to be committed to listening to everyone. I've come down here and I've met with your county supervisors. I've met with different officials to make sure that I can be a good and strong advocate for the challenges that we have. And I am committed to being a partner for our community. You know, when Tom McClintock voted to shut down the government in 2013 because that promoted his political agenda, he was forgetting the impact, or willfully neglecting, the impact that had on our community. That shuttered our businesses for 2 weeks after the Rim fire. And now that we're at the face of a government shutdown again, we need to be able to take a hard stand and recognize we need to be able to get McClintock out and get a representative in who will understand the impact of policy decisions on our community on the ground, and that's what I'm committed to doing, so I'm going to stick around. And let's do Hike with the Candidate.
Ms. Calderon.
So we all know that Tom McClintock's a carpetbagger, but one of the things that that many people don't know is that it's not against the rules for our congressperson to not live in the district. I propose that we demand that our congresspeople come from our districts, live in our districts, and I propose to introduce some type of legislation that includes that in there and that requires our congresspeople to spend a certain amount of days within their districts. In Congress right now, there's about 30 congresspeople who have spent 7 hours in their district over this entire time. So it is imperative that we demand that someone in the House of Representatives who was intended to be there as a representative of their community actually represents the people by knowing them, going to talk to them, going to their town halls, actually attending town halls. Another thing is, I have proposed with many of the state of Jefferson people and even the Tea Parties, and I make this commitment to every person that I would be representing, is creating citizen committees within the counties. This district is enormous, and it has 10 counties inside of it. And because of the just enormous size of it, it is very difficult for someone to have 1 or 2 offices and to make themselves available all over the place. The other thing is, the staffers that McClintock has shut their phones off, they lock their doors when they know that we're coming, they refuse meetings with us, they've blacklisted many constituents, and they pull the plugs on the phone so that even when you do call, there's no one there to answer. So all of those things need to be recorded. When we were actually demanding a record to see how many times we call and to see the ratio of how many calls they return or mail they answer, one of the things that the staffers let me know was that there is no requirement for them to keep any record or actually call you back. That is not okay. Why do we have to pay these congresspeople, these representatives, if they're not willing to represent us or even meet us halfway?
Okay, and this is the last prepared question. We may have others. Do we have others? One more, okay. All right, Ms. Morse, you're up. Do you support a single-payer healthcare system? And if so, what steps would you take to get us there? And if not, what would you do about healthcare instead?
Yes. We don't walk into a grocery store and get our milk and eggs and cheese and come home 2 weeks later and get a bill for $2,000 and say, oh gosh, I got out-of-network milk. Our healthcare system is broken. The way it is set up is broken. It's not a functioning market. And the ones that are suffering the most are our rural hospitals, who aren't getting the representation, who aren't getting the support, who aren't getting the funding. The structure is not set up to support rural hospitals right now, and that needs to change. It leaves us stranded outside of a golden hour where we can't get to a hospital in time if our rural hospital closed down. So we need to change the system, but the question is, how do we get there? And the resistance we'll get on a single payer or universal model is, how do we pay for it? And I think that's an important question to answer. So the first step is to actually figure out what is driving up the price of healthcare, and how do we drive it back down to reflect the actual cost of healthcare. California just passed a healthcare pharmaceutical transparency law, which allows us to look at the books of pharmaceutical industries so that we can see if their prices are reflective of the R&D that went into their drugs, or if those are reflective of a monopoly that they're taking advantage of. You know, we need to look at what's driving up the prices of hospitals. Is it people coming into the emergency rooms without insurance and then having that cost to get distributed throughout the rest of the system? This will allow us to understand what's driving up the price so that we can bring it down to the actual cost and make it more affordable. The next phase would be universal primary care. We need to have an emphasis on preventative measures. You know, here in Mariposa County, you just got a mammogram machine that's up to date and amazing to use and is starting to focus on preventative measure and preventative care. If that wasn't here, I talked to a woman today who said she wouldn't have gone in and she would have not driven all the way into Fresno or Madera or something to get that done, but because it was right there, she used it. We need to start emphasizing preventative measures and universal primary care so that people can start, so that people don't use the emergency care as their last recourse. Instead, it's going to be cheaper for us to have preventative, healthier population.
Ms. Calderon?
Do I support a single-payer healthcare system? Absolutely. I support Medicare expansion for all, a healthcare system that works for all Americans. Currently, we're talking about saving the ACA, and the ACA was a great start, but the ACA does not do enough. It got us started on the right path, because the ACA really currently only helps about 10% of the population. The rest of us have seen our prices rocket. And then we have to ask ourselves, why are prices rocketing? Well, there's a few things that play into this. Number one, if we were able to expand on the one thing that worked in the ACA, which was Medicaid expansion, then we already have a single-payer healthcare system that works. Of course, there are going to have to be some tweaks and fixes to the Medicare expansion program, but I support the bill that's currently in office. There's actually two, the HR 676 and the Bernie bill that he just introduced, how we're going to pay for this. So one of the things that we can do to bring down the costs is using the Medicare bargaining power. You know, right now, Medicare, Medicaid, they're able to pay 6 cents on the dollar that we pay through private insurance. So the prices are completely inflated. The second thing is obviously pharmaceuticals. We know that right now, a lot of the pharmaceutical companies, the big chains, they will slow down trademarks, they will really work on preventing any competition from coming into the market by delaying generics. The other thing is, right now it's legal for us to bargain and for the prices. They have worked with Congress. This is why we have such opposition in Congress, because the representatives are being funded by these huge companies to work against us. And we don't have any bargaining power. The other thing is, one of the very few topics that's ever brought up is that the American Medical Association creates a purposeful doctor shortage by working with Congress and preventing anyone from graduating or entering a residency program. So we have hundreds of thousands of people who are waiting in line to start a residency program, but all the funding has been diminished. So I would propose that we use this small percentage of money that's going to be coming from Wall Street, because I think it's due time that Wall Street repays us for bailing them out. And that's one of the ways that we can start paying to fund the federal program for residency programs to increase the doctors.
Ms. Bateson?
So I propose taking 3 steps on healthcare. I believe that access to healthcare that's affordable and real and near your home is both a right and a necessity for everything else we want to do in life. But how can we do the most good for the most people in the shortest amount of time? You know, what are the concrete, pragmatic, tangible priorities we have to have? First, protect and defend what we have. Right now, every pillar of our healthcare system is under assault. The Children's Health Insurance Program, Congress had allowed funding for this to expire. This is one of the most successful programs we've ever put into place. It is criminal that this could be allowed to languish this way. Medicare is facing cuts of $25 billion next year because of the tax plan that may very well go through and is being negotiated right now. The Medicaid expansion is under threat. And yes, the Affordable Care Act is not perfect. It is not the end of the road, nor was it ever intended to be. But it is under assault. It's done a lot of good for people here in our district. I really dispute the idea that only 10% of people have benefited from the Affordable Care Act. It cut the uninsurance rate in half in our district in just 2 years. At your local hospital here, when the ACA went into place, it cut in half the number of self-pay patients that go there. And guess what? Self-pay is kind of a misnomer because those payments aren't recouped, right? People usually aren't able to pay those bills. So the Affordable Care Act is doing really important things to support rural hospitals, to keep the doors open, and even to provide extra funding to rural public schools that provide therapies and get some additional reimbursements that way. You know, so if you want an emergency room within an hour of where you live that's open 24 hours a day, the Affordable Care Act is an important part of how your hospital here has been able to stay open. But it's not good enough. You know, I would concretely propose stabilizing the individual market, fighting to save and improve the ACA, make sure that we get the prices down for people who are self-employed, for small business owners. But then we need to cut costs also. We start with prescription drugs and get our government negotiating to bring those drug prices down. And we expand coverage. And yes, that could involve a single payer model. It could involve adding in a public option, or any number of hybrid options that we see around the developed world in places like Germany, Switzerland, that do achieve universal coverage. I think that should all be on the table, but we start by saving the ACA.
Okay, we have 3 audience questions. First one will be for Ms. Calderon. Have you signed the pledge to take no oil money for your campaign?
Yes, I was actually the first candidate to sign that pledge a few months ago, and I posted it on my page just right out of the gate. One of the reasons why is because, as I mentioned to you earlier, it is corporations who are mandating exactly what we eat, where we go, how we sleep, what doctor we go to, or what access we have to anything. And so I work for the oil industry, and I do not support the oil industry. In fact, I'm probably one of the most outspoken advocates for stopping any fracking and drilling in the United States and really internationally. So I signed a pledge for all fossil fuels, and I have been able to not just do that, but I support a bill that has been introduced by Tulsi Gabbard, which also is called the Off Fuels Bill, if you want to look it up. It's very important that we start working and giving incentives for companies to start working on renewable energy. And I think that once we start really targeting the pockets of the oil industry, it's the only time that we will see any actual change. So I know that the 2 people sitting next to me, they've also signed the pledge when we were to the environmental caucus. And I support any other person who signs that pledge. It's completely and absolutely imperative that we all jump on board.
Ms. Bateson, I guess she answered that you have signed it. Any more comments on the subject of oil contributions?
Yes, absolutely. I'd say I certainly have signed the pledge not to take money from the fossil fuel industry, specifically from oil companies, gas companies, but that's not good enough for me. I mean, I can also pledge to you that I'm not taking money from the extractive industries broadly. So, our large timber companies, mining companies. I think that being environmentally responsible and socially responsible and making sure that my actions are in line with my values goes beyond just signing the pledge not to take money from the fossil fuel industry. Not taking corporate money either. And, I'm really proud of the fact that our campaign got started with grassroots support. It is very unusual to be able to do that. Any political consultant will tell you that to start your campaign, you should make a list of wealthy people, and then you should cultivate them over the course of months. And on the first day you formally become a candidate, you should call them up and try to get them to each give $5,000 to your campaign, $2,700 to your campaign, maybe $10,800 per couple, which is the absolute legal maximum. And that is not how I got started. I got started with $20, $25 donations all across our district, and that's how our campaign has continued to grow. So I'm absolutely committed to keeping up that grassroots model. It's why we do house parties almost all the time. I'll give you a little plug and say that there's one in El Portal tomorrow night, and another one in Twain Harte on Saturday. But in all seriousness, I understand the needs to do serious levels of fundraising, and we are achieving that, but we are keeping our grassroots commitment here because we know who McClintock is loyal to. It's the Koch brothers, Sierra Pacific Industries, and I'm going to be loyal to you.
Ms. Morris.
So yes, I also took the pledge, and first of all, it's incredibly critical that we stop investing in oil. I mean, it doesn't even make economic sense anymore. That is a limited resource that is running out, and so we need to start weaning our energy and our economy off of oil. We need to start focusing on renewable energy investments, renewable energy technologies. When I talk to Republicans about this, I point out that investing in renewable energy actually saves the lives of our troops overseas. Our military is starting to wean itself off of oil because I was out on a base one day where our tanker truck was hit and all of our gas generators couldn't be fueled, which meant we didn't have air conditioning. And you might think, oh, poor baby, you didn't have air conditioning in your tent in Baghdad. But when it's 132 degrees out there, that meant that over a 3-day period, everyone started to get heat stroke. It was okay for me to be a little bit loopy, but for our troops going out in the field, it was not acceptable. And so when McClintock, who does take money from the oil industry, starts talking about cutting funding to climate change, what he's actually doing when he cuts the funding to the Renewable Energy Division at the Department of Energy, what he's cutting is the supply chain for our military to find scalable and new technologies that we can take out into the war zone so that our troops do not have to tank oil back and forth. Now let me talk also about the broader concept of what it means to accept money from someone. You know, who your donors are also reflects who the values are of your campaign. I was thrilled that we got over 1,000 individual contributions, 100 of which came from Republicans. Most of my donors were first-time political donors who had never been involved in politics before, but felt the urgency of the situation and they wanted something new, they wanted something fresh. You know, I come from a large rural Republican family. We are not wealthy people. We're very land rich and very cash poor, like many of the multi-generational families out here. And so I found that I was getting people inspired and excited and ready for something new. My donors are pushing me to break down these partisan divides. My donors are saying we're tired of the old school and the old way of politics and we're ready for something new. And my donors are all of you. It's members of our community who are investing in our campaign, ready for new representation and ready for a new face in Congress, and that's going to be me.
Hey then, Ms. Bateson. The district is rural, and many candidates in the past have taken NRA contributions. What do you understand this district's best approach to gun violence to be?
Well, let's start by being very clear that I'm most definitely not going to be taking contributions from the NRA. I mean, I sort of thought that went without saying, which is why I didn't mention it in the list before. You know, but at the same time, I really understand and respect the culture of responsible gun ownership that we have here in our district. There are a lot of perfectly legitimate reasons why people here in our district own guns and own firearms and have done so for generations. You know, someone in Placerville who was in his 90s told me that having a gun or a firearm around is just like a piece of the furniture for a lot of families. And traditionally, people always had 3 types of guns. You had a shotgun, you had a rifle, and you had a pistol in your home. And that's just completely normal. So this is an important part of the culture of our district. You're probably going to leave here today, and you're going to tell your friends, hey, we just saw a forum with 3 lady Democrats. And they're going to say, they're coming for my guns. So here's what I think we can all agree that we need you to take away with you. Actually, I want you to repeat this after me. The Democrats are not coming for your guns. Okay, let's say it.
Democrats are not coming for your guns.
Because here's the truth. California is way, way out ahead of the federal government when it comes to common sense protections to protect all of our safety and allow people to be responsible gun owners. So even if there's some action at the federal level to protect us, that's not going to affect the experience of people here in California in terms of background checks, in terms of how they purchase guns or how they sell them, or what they're able to do with them. But here's what we do need at the federal level. We need universal background checks, and we need a background check system that works. So that's my priority. And here's why, because I'll tell you, we've got pretty good policies here in California, but we're next door to Nevada. Nevada is one of the top exporters of crime guns in the entire country. That means it's a state that lets people buy guns with, in some cases, no background checks at all. Even a violent criminal, a domestic abuser can buy a gun. And they're right next door to us. So 90% of Americans and over 75% of NRA households agree we need universal background checks, and that is something that I support at the federal level to protect all of our safety.
Ms. Morse?
I will not be accepting NRA funding. Now, I came from a large rural Republican family here. So, of course, I grew up hunting and fishing with my dad and my cousins and my uncles. And it turns out I'm a better shot at pheasants than all of them. And so I can produce pictures of me and a dog and a gun and a pheasant. And that's part of our community. That's part of our heritage here. And I'm going to challenge McClintock to a shoot-off because I don't think he can hit a pheasant. And so I am part of this community and I understand it. And I've been finding that as an effective message to be able to assuage the fears of our friends and neighbors who do have NRA bumper stickers on the back of their vehicles. You know, I was talking actually with with someone out here, and we were agreeing on all sorts of things like workforce housing development and better water strategies. And he leans in and he says, "But what do you think about guns?" And we decided we'd go quail hunting. And that kind of answered his concern. But I said to him, well, how do you feel about the standards of gun safety that we already have here in California? Do those feel oppressive to you? Do they bother you? And he said, no, those are fine. And I said, great. What we're going to try to do is get the 2-week waiting periods in across the country. Because no one needs to be in a hurry to get a gun, just like you're not in a hurry to get your driver's license. You know, we can get the universal background checks that are up to standard across the nation, so that the responsible gun ownership we have here in our community can be the standard we have across the country. No one in our community would hand their gun to somebody who is mentally unstable or has a history of domestic violence. That should be a standard that we have across the country. And, you know, and McClintock is way off in La La Land when he tries to propose things like supporting silencers, because that supports hunters. I thought, anyone ever seen you go deer hunting with a silencer? I mean, really, that frankly endangers hikers, which offends me. And so we need practical, smart, intelligence gun safety standards. And we, as Californians, can all support that and get on board.
Ms. Calderon?
So no, I will also not be taking any NRA money, but we know someone who has. McClintock has taken over $13,000 in contributions from the NRA. And that's exactly who he votes for. It's not us who he's keeping in mind. So because I have been speaking across this district to people from all walks of life, and most of the time when I'm knocking on doors, I don't know who I'll be speaking to. But not long ago, I was down here during the Detweiler fire, and I was volunteering when this gentleman came up to us and was just very curious as to who I was. Now I was there, I guess incognito. No one knew that I was running for Congress. But the mere fact that he saw this Hispanic woman there, he just really wanted to know what I was doing there. And so I just kept trying to evade the question, and finally he asks my daughter, and she says, "My mom's running for Congress." So then he walks up to me and he goes, "So, what are you gonna do about guns?" And I said, you know what, I'm gonna give you a really quick example about what happened to me. So when I lived in North Dakota, we were moving back to California, and we were trying to figure out where we were going to live. And one of the things that I decided to do was, instead of renting an apartment while we were looking for a house to buy, we should buy a fifth-wheeler and live in that until we were ready to move. And I said, so when I went to the dealer to buy the fifth-wheeler, they kind of just let us sign paperwork, and they kind of just did a little walk around to teach us how to hook it, and that's about it. And I said, wait, we don't need anything else, like we don't need a license, we don't need anything else, any driving lessons, just a quick roundabout or anything. And the guy says, no, it's yours, here you go, here's the keys. But something like a panic set in me, and I started looking at the jackknifing that happens, the accidents that happen. There is no regulations for people, for motorhomes, for trailers, for RVs, there's nothing. And so I said, when I get on the road, it is now my full responsibility if something happens. I'm supposed to be insured, and if I get in a traffic accident and I kill someone, then I should be fully responsible for the accident that happened. So we have to think about guns at the same level. If you buy a gun, then you should be absolutely held responsible for whatever happens with that gun, whether it's your 2-year-old who shoots your wife accidentally and kills her, or whether it's someone who's mentally unstable and you, as the gun owner, left it easily available and readily for them to go do a shooting like what we saw in Sandy Hook. And he said, you know what, I had never really thought about it that way. and he said he would support me. So he went out to the library to hear me speak even further, because I was actually there earlier in the day. But outside of that, one last thing. The other answer that I give them is, yes, I'm running for Congress at the federal level. There's nothing in Congress that I can do that trumps what the regulations and laws are here in California.
Okay, last audience question. See, Ms. Morris, I believe this one's for you. Ms. Calderon addressed reproductive rights in her opening statement by stating her support of a woman's right to choose. Will you all expand on your stances on this issue?
I absolutely support a woman's right to choose. I recently took a tour of our Planned Parenthood facility in our district up in Roseville. And one of the points that they made is that they are serving an underprivileged population by giving women access to health care and preventative measures. We need to have a whole reframing of our conversation around these issues. This shouldn't be a single issue area where we vote. We have to demystify the myths that are out there about Planned Parenthood and access to family planning that we provide for women in our community. For example, Planned Parenthood does very few abortions. What they're mostly doing is women's health care and preventative care and family planning. I've been surprised that in our district, Planned Parenthood actually has a fairly high approval rating, because what we all want as a community is fewer abortions. We don't want anyone to have to go through that. But the tools and the approach to doing it, that's the political debate that we're having. And the tools that people are starting to come on board with in our community is recognizing that having access to education, having access to reproductive health care, and having access to family planning tools reduces the rate of abortion, which is why we are seeing one of the lowest abortion rates in our country that we've seen since before Roe versus Wade. And if you look back at a century ago, when abortions were illegal, what you had is women having to get illegal abortions that were botched, and they were dying from them. And I've seen this in other countries around the world. A young woman in Afghanistan died a terrible and gut-wrenching death because she had a botched abortion. And this is happening in our modern world today, and we don't need to take us back a century ago with our policies. We need smart strategies to work together to educate, to have access to education and access to health care for women around the country, and particularly women in rural communities that don't have easy access to hospital care as well. So that's something I'm very committed to supporting women on every level, and particularly on this one.
Ms. Calderon?
I'm a longtime supporter of Planned Parenthood. In fact, in February, we held a rally to support Planned Parenthood when we saw that they were under threat to have a lot of the funding being cut. What Planned Parenthood is suffering from right now is a marketing problem. Many of these people, anytime that you hear something negative about Planned Parenthood, it is because they try to sell it as, they're just holding abortions. But the reality is that they provide a lot more services than just that. And in fact, I'm one of those people who has benefited from those services. In fact, I'm benefiting from them now because the ACA has been able to only cover a small fraction of people, and for others it has skyrocketed the prices. As a small business owner, I've actually had to fall back into Planned Parenthood and apply for services there. So I completely support them because I had my yearly checkup, and those are the things that I want to talk about. Actually, I was knocking on doors just this last weekend. And as we're going up the driveway, I see a Catholic radio sticker on the minivan that we're going up to see. And we knock on the door, and the woman who opens the door, I can see her 5 children. They're like just running behind her when she opens the door, and she actually steps outside, and I can hear them. And we start talking about the issues that matter to her. I introduce myself, and I think she's just waiting for that moment to ask me, "Do you support a woman's right to choose?" And I said, "Absolutely." And she said, "Well, I can't vote for you based on that single issue." So how do we reframe that? Immediately I said, there's much more than that. To bring a child to this world, you have to consider what world we're actually bringing them into. You have 5 children. I'm sure you're married. And she said, yes. And I said, do both you and your husband work? And she said, well, right now, I'm the only one that's staying home so that we can take care of our children. And I said, so those are the things that I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for FMLA so that you as a parent can have time off to take care of your children. I'm also fighting for equity in pay so that people are being paid a fair wage so that your husband, maybe you can survive with one income. I'm fighting for childcare costs so that you don't have to give up your job and stay home to support your family. There are many other issues that you have to think about when bringing a child to this world. I'm a mother, and I believe that maybe abortion should be a last case, last resort, but we have to start with actual reproductive information, education, and family planning.
Ms. Bateson?
So yes, I support a woman's right to choose. And I understand that we need women to be able to make the choices that are right for them and their families. Strong women make for strong families and a strong community. I've also got personal first-hand experience with, I think, the whole range of women's health care issues. I've been a patient of Planned Parenthood. I've been a patient of high-risk obstetrical practices. You know, if you look at the flyer back there, you'll see that we had twins. That entailed having an ultrasound just about every single week because it was pretty high risk. So, you know, I understand the choices that families face and that women face. But I also think, you know, that we need to be talking about McClintock and his record here, and the strong contrast that I can offer to our region and our community and our families. Before I even got into this race, before I met him, there's a man named Roy Maps. And I actually saw online that he wrote a column I encourage you all to read. It's titled, "Does Tom McClintock hate women, or does he just not care?" And here's some of the stuff that Roy, an older gentleman from Copperopolis, goes through and points out. In the state legislature, Tom McClintock was opposed to requiring insurance companies to cover contraception just like any other medication. Tom McClintock is one of only 9 Republicans who voted against the GOP-authored renewal of the Violence Against Women Act. He called it a feel-good measure that's a waste of government money. Tom McClintock is a staunch opponent of equal pay for equal work. And at every turn, he undermines women's rights and women's dignity. I couldn't be more different. You know, I'll tell you specifically the moment in that Tom McClintock town hall meeting that drove me to actually make my website and run for Congress. There was a 12-year-old girl there. She stood up and she said, with a couple hundred people watching, to Tom McClintock, you know, during the 2016 campaign, you defended Donald Trump's behavior and his treatment of women. What are you going to do as my representative to defend my rights and dignity as a young woman? And I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Here's what McClintock said to her. He said, yes, Donald Trump did some things that were disrespectful, and I think he's apologized, and that was many years ago. And that was it. And I said, that's unacceptable. Because I was a 13-year-old girl once who asked a question of John Doolittle. It was about the Auburn Dam. Now, I didn't like the answer I got back, but he at least answered the question and did so respectfully. The whole premise of her question was about being respected and valued in society, and all he did in his answer was refuse to even acknowledge that or say anything meaningful about her future or her rights or her dignity. So I think that's wrong. I think that we should not have someone like that representing us in Congress who does not speak for us and who does not share our values.
Okay, that's the end of audience questions. So we come to that point where, Ms. Calderon, you're next. Do you have a question for your other 2 compatriots there?
You know, I'll be quick as to why I don't have a question of them. When they both decided to run, I was part of Cluster Women Democrats, and we went through an intensive interview process to get to know the candidates. So I think I know them fairly well. I know that they both moved back into the district to run for Congress because they believe that they can make effective change here. And I believe that it's your choice and your opportunity today to ask questions, so I will render my question time.
Ms. Bateson?
I'll do the same. I think you guys have been very patient tonight and thoroughly exhaustive in your questioning. Honestly, I'll give my time back to you. I think it's probably more productive to have individual conversations with each of you after this event tonight.
Ms. Morris?
I'll go with the team on this one.
All right then. we get to closing statements, I want to acknowledge our timekeeping team. They've done an excellent job and okay, Ms. Bateson, I think you're up for the closing statement. We have 1 minute. 1 minute. 1 minute.
All right, so I'm Regina Bateson, and I'm running for Congress to stand up for what's right, for our families, for our community, for our region, and for our values. We're going to be fighting in the campaign, once I'm in office, for good paying jobs, strong local economy, affordable health care, excellent public education, and a clean, safe, healthy environment that supports our economy and lets us all live our lives the way we want to. And this message is resonating. I'm asking for your support in the Democratic Party's endorsement process because we've got the best shot at beating McClintock next year. We have this amazing grassroots network of volunteers. You can meet some of them here tonight. More than 400 people strong, and the serious fundraising that we need. But we've also shown that our message is resonating across the political spectrum. You know, it was very intentional on my part when I chose the golden poppies, our logo. I think we need to be tapping into people's pride in the region, and we need to be approaching them in a way that's open and friendly and nonpartisan. And I'll tell you, Democrats have almost won the 4th district before. One of them was Pat Malberg in 1990 and 1992. We had 49% of the vote. And we recently discovered that her logo back then was also the golden poppy. We have some similarities with that campaign. We can get it done next year, and I'm asking you to please join us. Thank you.
Ms. Morris.
When I signed on as a public servant, I took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This is not an oath to protect a political party. It's not an oath to protect a personality or a president. It's an oath to protect the foundation of our democracy. And our democracy builds dialogue into its very foundation. Our Constitution was written to bring groups of different opinions together to find solutions that are going to be sustaining. So when we have a representative who claims that their constituents are part of radical leftist experiments of voter registration, or the liberal elite, or however he wants to label them, and refuses to listen, this is somebody who is making a mockery of our Constitution. This is somebody who is rendering our democracy inept, and that is not good enough for our community. We need someone who is going to stand up and represent the foundations of our community. So I'm launching something I'm calling the New Morse Code. And this is my personal code of conduct, my personal standard for supporting our community to ensure that we're putting our community first, that we're making public service the foundation of politics, and that I'm first and foremost serving you. So it is my honor and privilege to stand here tonight, and I look forward to having you join me in this campaign as we take our community back, and I will serve and fight for you every day. Thank you.
Ms. Calderon.
We're running a very small campaign. Right now, we actually have just reached our 5,000th individual donor, which has just been incredible. Every single month, we're hitting that 1,000 mark, which is just immense support. But we have kept it within the district at small donations. The average is $13.81. So what I'm trying to do is give us a voice back. I have been nationally endorsed by Justice Democrats, which tries to get that money out of politics. I've been endorsed by Brand New Congress, which is a slate of candidates working across the aisle, Republicans and independents, to create a working Congress. Imagine that. The other thing is that I want to make sure that we move forward together. I want to make sure that the appropriate people have a seat at the table so that they also are given a voice. And I represent a lot of minorities. I'm a woman, I'm a Latina, I'm an immigrant, but I'm also a scientist. And we need a seat at the table so that we can provide that diversity that our Congress truly lacks today. So I ask every single one of you if you could support me. I have the support. Soon enough, you'll see all the names that we're going to be releasing. And at the pre-endorsement conference, I am in dire need of those elected officials or the endorsement process to give me those votes so that we can move forward with the state party and then hopefully with the national progress. So thank you so much. I hope that we can really have someone who represents us, McClintock doesn't speak for us, he doesn't live here, he doesn't deserve to represent us. So we will unite, organize, and we will win. Thank you.
This concludes our evening, and I'm sure you all agree we have 3 wonderful